Silence. It's a powerful tool, yet so often overlooked in our noisy world. Today, we're going to explore 7 critical situations where staying silent isn't just an option. It's absolutely essential. These are moments that can shape your life, your relationships, and your future. So lean in, because what I'm about to share could be the difference between success and failure, between wisdom and foolishness. Now, I've been around the block a few times, and I've seen people talk themselves into trouble more times than I can count. But I've also witnessed the incredible power of those who know when to hold their tongue. It's like watching a master at work. They navigate life's trickiest situations with grace and come out on top. Let's dive right in, shall we? Situation number 1. When you're angry, how many times have I seen good folks dig themselves into a hole because they couldn't keep a lid on their temper? You see, anger is like a wildfire. It starts small, but if you feed it with words, it'll grow until it's out of control, burning everything in its path, including relationships, opportunities, and your own reputation. I remember a time back in my hometown. There was this fella, let's call him Joe. Now, Joe was a hard worker, salt of the earth type, but he had a temper that could flare up faster than a match in a haystack. One day, his boss criticized his work in front of the whole team. Joe's face turned red as a tomato, and I could see the steam coming out of his ears. He opened his mouth, ready to let loose a torrent of angry words. But then, something remarkable happened. He closed his mouth, took a deep breath, and simply nodded. Later, he told me, I realized in that moment that whatever I said in anger would have only made things worse. So I chose to say nothing at all. And you know what? That silence spoke volumes. It showed maturity, self-control, and what his boss noticed. And a week later, Joe got a promotion. You see, when anger rises, silence is often the best response. It gives you time to cool down, to think clearly, and to respond rather than react. Remember, folks, it's not about suppressing your feelings. It's about choosing the right time and place to express them. Moving on to situation number 2. When you don't have all the facts, in this world of instant information and knee-jerk reactions, it's more important than ever to pause before you speak. How many times have you seen someone make a fool of themselves by spouting off about something they knew nothing about? I'm reminded of a story from my early days in business. There was a young man in our company, fresh out of college, full of enthusiasm and eager to prove himself. One day in a meeting, the topic of a new product line came up. This young fella, let's call him Tom, jumped in with both feet, criticizing the idea left and right. He was certain it would fail, and he wasn't shy about saying so. What Tom didn't know was that the company had spent months researching this product. They had market studies, focus group results, and a whole team of experts behind the idea. If he just stayed quiet and listened, he would have learned all this. Instead, he talked himself right out of a promotion and nearly out of a job. The lesson here is clear. When you don't have all the facts, silence is your best friend. It gives you the chance to learn, to gather information, and to make informed decisions. Remember, it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Situation number 3. When it's not your story to tell. Gossip. It's tempting, isn't it? There's a certain thrill in being the one with the juicy news, the inside scoop. But let me tell you, friends, nothing good ever comes from spreading other people's business. I knew a woman once, we'll call her Sarah. She was the sweetest thing, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. But she had one flaw. She couldn't keep a secret to save her life. If she heard something, you could bet your bottom dollar the whole town would know by sundown. One day, Sarah overheard her neighbor talking about some financial troubles. Before you could say Jack Robinson, she told half the neighborhood. The neighbor was humiliated. And trust me, it didn't end well for Sarah. She lost friends, respect, and her reputation as a trustworthy person. You see, when it's not your story to tell, silence isn't just the best policy, it's the only policy. It shows respect for others' privacy and demonstrates your integrity. People will trust you more, confide in you more, and respect you more when they know you can keep things to yourself. Let's talk about situation number 4. When you're in a position of power, this one's crucial, folks. When you're in charge, whether it's as a parent, a boss, or a leader in your community, your words carry extra weight. And with great power comes great responsibility. I remember a time when I was just starting out in my career. I had this boss, let's call him Mr. Johnson. He was a good man, but he had a habit of thinking out loud. He'd share every idea that popped into his head, every concern. And let me tell you, it created chaos in that office. One day, he casually mentioned that the company might be considering layoffs. It was just a passing thought, nothing concrete. But you should have seen what happened. Productivity plummeted, morale hit rock bottom, and 3 of our best employees quit before the week was out. All because Mr. Johnson couldn't keep his thoughts to himself. When you're in a position of power, your words can move markets, shape lives, and change the course of events. That's why it's so important to choose them carefully, or sometimes not to choose them at all. Silence gives you time to consider the impact of your words, to strategize, and to communicate more effectively when the time is right. Situation number 5, when you're tempted to make a promise. Oh, promises. They're so easy to make and so hard to keep, aren't they? In our eagerness to please, to help, to be liked, we often commit to things we can't follow through. And let me tell you, a broken promise can do more damage than never making one at all. I had a friend once, we'll call him Bob. Bob was a people pleaser. He'd say yes to everything, promise the moon and the stars if it would make someone happy. But more often than not, he'd end up disappointing people because he couldn't deliver on all those promises. One time, Bob promised his daughter he'd take her to the state fair. She was over the moon, counting down the days. But when the day came, Bob had to work late. He'd forgotten he had a big project due. That little girl was heartbroken, and their relationship was never quite the same after that. You see, silence is golden when you're tempted to make a promise you're not sure you can keep. It's better to underpromise and over-deliver than the other way around. Take time to consider if you can really follow through before you commit. Your word's your bond, and in this world, a person's reputation for reliability is worth its weight in gold. Moving on to situation number 6. When you're in negotiation. Now, this is where silence can be your secret weapon. In business, in relationships, in life, knowing when to keep quiet can give you the upper hand. I remember once I was negotiating the price of a car. The salesman gave me his best offer, and then he just stood there waiting for my response. Now, most people would feel uncomfortable with that silence and rush to fill it. They'd start talking, maybe even talking themselves into a worse deal. But I just stood there silent as a stone. And you know what happened? That salesman started to sweat. He fidgeted, he stammered, and then, bam, he lowered the price again. You see, in a negotiation, silence creates pressure. It makes the other person uncomfortable, and they'll often fill that silence with concessions. Plus, when you're quiet, you have time to think, to strategize, to consider your options. Remember, folks, he who speaks first often loses. And finally, we come to situation number 7, when you're tempted to criticize. Now, this one's tough. We all see things we'd like to change, behaviors we'd like to correct, and sometimes criticism is necessary. But more often than not, keeping silent is the wiser choice. I once knew a couple, let's call them Tom and Jane. They were good people, but they had a habit of constantly criticizing each other. If Tom left his socks on the floor, Jane would nag him about it. If Jane was a few minutes late, Tom would make snide comments. It was like a never-ending ping-pong match of criticism. One day, I sat them down and asked them, what would happen if, instead of criticizing, you just stayed silent? They looked at me like I'd grown a second head, but they agreed to try it for a week. And you know what? It transformed their relationship. They started noticing the good things about each other instead of always focusing on the negatives. They learned to pick their battles, to let the little things slide. You see, constant criticism wears people down. It erodes relationships, destroys self-esteem, and creates a negative atmosphere. But silence gives people room to grow, to learn from their own mistakes. It allows for grace and understanding. And often, it's more effective than any words could be. Now, I want you to understand something important. When I talk about silence in these situations, I'm not talking about being a doormat. I'm not saying you should never express your feelings, never stand up for yourself, never communicate. What I'm saying is that in these critical moments, pause before you speak, take a breath, consider whether your words will help or harm the situation. You see, words are like toothpaste. Once they're out, you can't put them back in. But silence is reversible. You can always choose to speak later, when you're calmer, when you have more information, when the time is right. In our world today, it seems like everyone's shouting to be heard. We're bombarded with noise from every direction. But true power, true wisdom often lies in silence. It's in those quiet moments that we find clarity, that we connect with others on a deeper level, that we make space for growth and understanding. I want you to try something. The next time you find yourself in one of these 7 situations, when you're angry, when you don't have all the facts, when it's not your story to tell, when you're in a position of power, when you're tempted to make a promise, when you're in a negotiation, or when you're tempted to criticize, I want you to pause, take a deep breath, and choose silence. It might feel uncomfortable at first. You might feel the urge to fill that silence with words, but resist that urge. Embrace the quiet and watch what happens. You might be surprised at the power of your silence. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Like any skill, mastering the art of silence takes practice. You'll slip up sometimes, and that's okay. The important thing is to keep trying, to keep growing, to keep learning. Remember, folks, silence is not weakness. It's not passivity. It's a choice, a powerful choice that can shape your life in profound ways. It's a sign of emotional intelligence, of self-control, of wisdom. In a world that values noise, be the one who values silence. I want you to imagine for a moment what your life could look like if you mastered this skill. Imagine the conflicts you could avoid, the respect you could earn, the wisdom you could gain. Imagine the depth of your relationships, the success in your career, the peace in your heart. That's the power of silence, my friends. That's what's available to you when you learn to hold your tongue in these 7 crucial situations. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but what about standing up for myself? What about speaking my mind? And you're right to ask those questions. There's a time and place for everything, including speaking up. But what I'm proposing here is not permanent silence. It's strategic silence. It's about choosing your moments, picking your battles, and making your words count when you do speak. You see, when you're known as someone who doesn't speak, unless they have something valuable to say, people listen when you do open your mouth. Your words carry more weight. You become a person of substance, of wisdom, of influence. Let me share a personal story with you. Early in my career, I was in a meeting with some big shots in the industry. I was the youngest person there, and I was eager to prove myself. I had all these ideas bouncing around in my head, and I was just itching to share them. But something held me back. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was intuition. Whatever it was, I decided to keep quiet and just listen. For 2 hours, I sat there, taking it all in. I watched how these successful people interacted, how they made decisions, how they handled disagreements. And you know what? I learned more in those 2 hours of silence than I could have in a year of talk. At the end of the meeting, the CEO turned to me and said, "You haven't said much. What do you think?" And in that moment, because I'd been quiet, because I'd been listening and observing, I was able to offer an insight that nobody else had seen. That moment of silence, followed by a thoughtful contribution, changed the trajectory of my career. That's the power of strategic silence, folks. It's not about never speaking. It's about choosing your moments for maximum impact. Now, I want to address something important here. Some of you might be thinking, but I've always been told to speak up to make my voice heard. And you're right, there are certainly times when that's important. But here's the thing. In a world where everyone is clamoring to be heard, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is silence. Think about the people you admire most, the true leaders, the wise mentors, the individuals who have made a real difference in the world. I bet if you really think about it, you'll realize that these people aren't the loudest in the room. They're not the ones constantly fighting to get a word in edgewise. No, they're the ones who listen more than they speak. They're the ones who choose their words carefully. They're the ones who know the power of silence. You see, silence gives you an edge. It allows you to observe, to think, to strategize while others are busy talking. It helps you avoid the pitfalls of speaking without thinking. It gives you time to formulate thoughtful responses instead of knee-jerk reactions. But beyond that, silence has a power all its own. It can communicate volumes without a single word being spoken. A moment of silence can express disapproval more effectively than a lengthy lecture. It can convey thoughtfulness and consideration. It can create an air of mystery and intrigue. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's silence made you more uncomfortable than any words could have? That's the power of silence at work. Now, I want to be clear about something. When I talk about the power of silence, I'm not advocating for being silent all the time. Communication is vital in all areas of life, in our relationships, in our careers, in our personal growth. What I'm advocating for is mindful silence, strategic silence. Silence as a tool, not as a default state. The key is to find the right balance, to know when to speak and when to remain silent, to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Let's go back to our 7 situations for a moment. When you're angry, silence gives you time to cool down and respond rationally instead of lashing out. When you don't have all the facts, silence prevents you from making a fool of yourself and gives you the opportunity to learn. When it's not your story to tell, silence protects relationships and builds trust. When you're in a position of power, silence allows you to make more thoughtful decisions and communicate more effectively. When you're tempted to make a promise, silence gives you time to consider whether you can really follow through. In a negotiation, silence can be a powerful tool to gain the upper hand. And when you're tempted to criticize, silence can often be more effective in promoting change than harsh words. In each of these situations, silence isn't just the absence of speech. It's an active choice, a powerful choice, a choice that can shape outcomes, influence people, and change the course of events. Now, I know that for some of you, this might be a big shift. Maybe you've always been the talkative type. Maybe you feel uncomfortable with silence. Maybe you worry that if you don't speak up, you'll be overlooked or forgotten. But I want to challenge you to try this approach. Start small if you need to. The next time you're in one of these 7 situations, take a deep breath and choose silence. See what happens. I think you'll be surprised at the results. Remember, growth happens outside our comfort zone. It might feel strange at first to hold your tongue when you're used to speaking up. But with practice, it'll become more natural. And the benefits are worth it, my friends. You'll find that people start to see you differently. They'll perceive you as more thoughtful, more mature, more in control. You'll make fewer mistakes, have fewer regrets about things you've said in the heat of the moment. You'll become a better listener, a keener observer. You'll gain insights and understanding that you might have missed if you were always busy talking. And here's something else to consider. When you embrace silence in these key moments, you create space. Space for others to speak, to share their thoughts and ideas. Space for deeper understanding and connection, space for reflection and growth. You become not just a speaker, but a facilitator of meaningful dialogue and positive change. Now, I want to address a concern that some of you might have. You might be thinking, But if I'm always silent, won't people think I have nothing to contribute? And that's a valid concern. But here's the thing. When you choose your moments to speak, when you only open your mouth when you have something truly valuable to say, people will listen. Your words will carry weight. You'll be seen as the wise one, the thoughtful one, the one whose opinion really matters. Think about it this way. Have you ever been in a meeting where one person just wouldn't stop talking? They had an opinion on everything, a comment for every situation. After a while, people start to tune them out, right? But then there's that other person, the one who doesn't say much. But when they do speak, everyone leans in to listen. That's the power of strategic silence. Let me share another story with you. I once knew a man, let's call him William. William was a master of silence. He was a successful businessman, a respected community leader, and a loving family man. But what struck me most about William was his ability to command a room without saying a word. I remember attending a contentious town hall meeting with William. The issue at hand was divisive and emotions were running high. People were shouting over each other. Tempers were flaring. And there sat William, calm as could be, not saying a word. But his presence was palpable. People kept glancing at him, wondering what he thought. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of heated debate, someone asked William for his opinion. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. And William, in his quiet, measured way, spoke for perhaps 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, he managed to distill the issue to its essence, propose a solution that addressed everyone's concerns, and diffused the tension in the room. It was a masterclass in the power of silence. By holding his tongue while others argued, William had time to listen, to think, to formulate a response that truly added value. And because he hadn't been jumping into the fray at every opportunity, when he did speak, people listened. That's the kind of influence you can have when you master the art of silence. It's not about being meek or passive. It's about being strategic, thoughtful, and impactful with your words. Now, I want to talk about something that's crucial to understanding the power of silence: emotional intelligence. You see, knowing when to stay silent is a key component of emotional intelligence. It's about being aware of your own emotions and those of others, and managing your responses accordingly. When you're angry, for instance, staying silent isn't just about avoiding saying something you'll regret. It's about recognizing that your anger is clouding your judgment and giving yourself time to process those emotions before you respond. It's about understanding that your words, spoken in anger, could hurt others and damage relationships. Similarly, when you're tempted to criticize, choosing silence isn't about suppressing your opinions. It's about recognizing that criticism, even when well-intentioned, can be damaging if not delivered in the right way at the right time. It's about being empathetic to the other person's feelings and choosing a more constructive approach. In a negotiation, silence isn't just a tactic to make the other person uncomfortable. It's about being attuned to the subtle cues and shifts in the conversation and using that awareness to guide your responses. You see, silence gives you the space to engage your emotional intelligence. It allows you to respond rather than react, to choose your words and actions thoughtfully rather than impulsively. And here's something else to consider. Silence can be a powerful tool for personal growth. When you're silent, you have the opportunity to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. You can tune into your own thoughts and feelings, gain clarity on your values and priorities, and make more aligned decisions. I remember a time in my own life when I was facing a major decision. I was torn between two paths, both with their own pros and cons. I talked it over with friends and family, sought advice from mentors, read books and articles. But the more I talked about it, the more confused I became. Finally, I decided to take a day of silence. No phone, no TV, no conversations, just me, a notebook and my thoughts. And you know what? In that silence, the answer became clear. Without the noise of other people's opinions and my own rationalizations, I was able to connect with what I truly wanted and needed. That's the power of silence for personal growth. It gives you the space to connect with your inner wisdom, to hear your own voice above the noise of the world. Now, I want to circle back to our 7 situations and dive a little deeper into each one, because understanding these situations and why silence is so crucial in each of them can help you navigate life's challenges more effectively. Let's start with anger. We've all been there, haven't we? Someone says something that pushes our buttons, and we feel that rush of heat, that urge to lash out. But here's the thing about anger. It's like a fire. If you feed it with words, it grows. If you starve it of oxygen, in this case, your angry words, it dies down. When you choose silence in the face of anger, you're not just avoiding saying something you'll regret. You're actually giving yourself the gift of time. Time for that initial surge of emotion to subside. Time to think rationally about the situation. Time to choose a response that aligns with your values and goals, rather than reacting from a place of hurt or frustration. And there's another benefit to silence when you're angry. It can actually be more impactful than any words. Think about it. If someone's trying to provoke you and you respond with calm silence, it throws them off balance. They're expecting an angry response. And when they don't get it, it often makes them reconsider their own behavior. Moving on to our second situation. When you don't have all the facts, in today's world, we're often pressured to have an instant opinion on everything. But the truth is, most situations are complex. There are usually nuances and details that aren't immediately apparent. When you choose silence in these situations, you're giving yourself the opportunity to learn, to gather more information, to consider different perspectives. And in doing so, you avoid the embarrassment of speaking authoritatively about something you don't fully understand. But more than that, you position yourself as a thoughtful, considered person, someone who values accuracy and truth over being the first to speak or the loudest voice in the room. In a world of knee-jerk reactions and uninformed opinions, that kind of thoughtfulness stands out. Now let's talk about the third situation, when it's not your story to tell. This one's all about respect and trust. When someone shares something personal with you, they're entrusting you with a part of themselves. Keeping that confidence is not just about being a good friend or colleague. When you choose silence in these situations, you're showing that you're trustworthy, that you respect others' privacy, that you value relationships over the momentary thrill of sharing gossip. And let me tell you, that kind of trustworthiness is rare and valuable. It's the foundation of deep, meaningful relationships, both personal and professional. Moving on to our fourth situation. When you're in a position of power. This one's crucial, folks. When you're in a leadership position, whether it's as a parent, a boss, or a community leader, your words carry extra weight. People look to you for guidance, for direction, for reassurance. And that's precisely why silence can be so powerful in these situations. When you're silent, you create space for others to step up, to share their ideas, to take initiative. You avoid the pitfall of micromanaging or overwhelming your team with too much information. But more than that, strategic silence as a leader shows that you trust your team. It shows that you're confident enough in your position that you don't need to fill every silence with the sound of your own voice. And that kind of quiet confidence, it's magnetic. It inspires respect and loyalty. Now let's consider our fifth situation. When you're tempted to make a promise. Oh, how easy it is to make promises in the moment, isn't it? We want to please people, to be helpful, to be liked. But a promise is a serious thing. It's your word, your bond. Breaking a promise can damage relationships and your own reputation. When you choose silence instead of making a hasty promise, you're giving yourself time to consider whether you can really follow through. You're being honest with yourself and with others. You're showing that you take your commitments seriously. And here's the thing. People respect that. They'd rather hear a thoughtful, let me think about that, than an eager promise that later gets broken. It's about integrity, about being a person of your word. Moving on to our sixth situation. When you're in a negotiation, now this is where silence can be your secret weapon. In a negotiation, there's often a temptation to fill every silence to keep talking, to justify your position. But often, The person who speaks less holds more power. When you choose silence in a negotiation, you're doing several powerful things. First, you're giving yourself time to think, to strategize, to consider your next move. Second, you're putting pressure on the other party. Silence can make people uncomfortable, and in that discomfort, they often reveal more than they intended or make concessions they hadn't planned on. But beyond that, silence in a negotiation shows confidence. It shows that you're not desperate to make a deal at any cost. It shows that you're in control of yourself and the situation, and that kind of quiet confidence can often tip the scales in your favor. Finally, let's talk about our seventh situation, when you're tempted to criticize. This one's a real challenge, isn't it? We all see things we'd like to change, behaviors we'd like to correct. And sometimes criticism is necessary. But more often than not, criticism, especially when it's frequent or harsh, does more harm than good. When you choose silence instead of criticism, you're not ignoring problems. Instead, you're creating space for people to recognize their own mistakes, to learn and grow on their own terms. You're avoiding the defensiveness that often comes with criticism, and instead fostering an environment of trust and open communication. And here's something else to consider. Often, the things we're tempted to criticize in others are reflections of things we struggle with ourselves. So when you feel that urge to criticize, use that silence to turn inward. Ask yourself why this particular thing bothers you so much. You might be surprised at what you learn about yourself. Now, I want to address something important. Some of you might be thinking, this all sounds great in theory, but how do I actually put it into practice? And that's a great question. Like any skill, mastering the art of silence takes practice and patience. Here's what I suggest. Start small. The next time you find yourself in one of these 7 situations, take a deep breath. Count to 10 in your head. Give yourself that moment of pause before you speak. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but stick with it. As you get more comfortable with those small moments of silence, try extending them. See what happens if you stay silent for 30 seconds or a minute. Pay attention to how it affects the situation, how it makes you feel, how others respond. And here's a powerful exercise. Try taking a silence break each day. It could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour. Turn off your phone, step away from your computer, and just be silent. Use that time to think, to reflect, to connect with yourself. You'll be amazed at how refreshing and clarifying these moments of silence can be. Remember, the goal isn't to never speak. The goal is to make your words count when you do speak, to choose silence strategically, thoughtfully, purposefully. Now, I want to share something personal with you. When I first started practicing this approach, it wasn't easy. I was used to filling silences, to always having something to say. The first few times I chose silence in a heated moment, it felt almost physically painful. I could feel the words building up inside me, desperate to get out. But I stuck with it. And you know what? It got easier. More than that, it became powerful. I started noticing changes in how people responded to me. They listened more when I did speak. They sought out my opinion. They trusted me with their confidences. And I noticed changes in myself too. I became calmer, more centered. I made better decisions because I gave myself time to think before speaking. My relationships improved because I was really listening, really present, instead of just waiting for my turn to talk. That's the transformative power of silence, folks. It's not just about what you don't say. It's about who you become when you master the art of silence. Now, I want to be clear about something. This approach to silence doesn't mean becoming a pushover. It doesn't mean never standing up for yourself or others. There are absolutely times when speaking up is not just important, but necessary. The key is discernment. It's about developing the wisdom to know when silence is the most powerful choice. And when speaking up is crucial, it's about being intentional with your words, using them not as filler, but as tools to create positive change. Think of it this way. Every word you speak is like a pebble thrown into a pond. It creates ripples that spread out, affecting everything they touch. When you choose silence in these key moments, you're choosing not to create unnecessary ripple. You're choosing to act with purpose and intention rather than reacting. And here's something else to consider. When you embrace silence in these moments, you become a calm center in a noisy world. In a culture that often values the loudest voice, the quickest response, the cleverest comeback, your thoughtful silence stands out. It draws people to you. It makes them curious about what you think, what you know. You become like that still pond, reflecting truth and wisdom rather than constantly creating ripples that distort the surface. Now, I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier, the idea of silence as a tool for personal growth. You see, when you embrace silence in these key moments, you're not just changing how you interact with the world, you're changing how you interact with yourself. In those moments of silence, you have the opportunity to really listen to your own thoughts, to examine your own reactions. You start to notice patterns in your thinking and your emotional responses. And that awareness, that's the first step to personal growth and positive change. It's like you're creating a space between stimulus and response. In that space, you have the power to choose how you'll react rather than just operating on autopilot. And over time, as you get more comfortable with that space, you'll find yourself making choices that are more aligned with your values, your goals, your true self. That's the real power of silence, folks. It's not just about what you don't say to others. It's about what you start to hear when you quiet the noise and listen to yourself. Now, I want to address something that some of you might be concerned about. You might be thinking, but if I'm always silent in these situations, won't I miss opportunities? Won't I let people walk all over me? And those are valid concerns. But here's the thing. Strategic silence isn't about being silent all the time. It's about choosing your moments. It's about speaking with purpose and intention when you do speak. When you're not filling every silence with words, when you're really listening and observing, you actually become more attuned to those moments when speaking up is crucial. And when you do speak up in those moments, your words carry more weight because people know that when you speak, it's because you have something valuable to say, not just because you're filling silence. Think about the most influential people you know. Chances are they're not the ones who are always talking. They're the ones who listen more than they speak, who think before they talk, who choose their words carefully. That's the kind of influence you can have when you master the art of silence. Now, as we start to wrap up, I want to leave you with a challenge. For the next week, I want you to practice intentional silence in these 7 situations. When you feel anger rising, take a deep breath and choose silence. When you don't have all the facts, resist the urge to offer an uninformed opinion. When you hear a juicy piece of gossip, keep it to yourself. When you're in a position of power, create space for others to speak. When you're tempted to make a promise, pause and consider if you can really follow through. In a negotiation, try using silence as a tool. And when you're tempted to criticize, hold your tongue and look for a more constructive approach. It won't be easy. You'll probably slip up sometimes, and that's okay. The important thing is to keep trying, to stay aware, to keep choosing silence even when it's uncomfortable. And at the end of that week, take some time to reflect. How did it feel to choose silence in these moments? How did others respond? What did you learn about yourself? I think you'll be surprised at the insights you gain and the positive changes you see. Remember, folks, in a world that's constantly noisy, silence is a superpower. It's a choice that can transform your relationships, your career, your life. It's a path to greater wisdom, deeper connections, and more meaningful impact. So I challenge you, embrace the power of silence in those 7 crucial situations and in your life as a whole. Create space for reflection, for growth, for meaningful connection. Be the calm center in a chaotic world. Speak with purpose and intention. And watch as your influence grows, your relationships deepen, and your life transforms.